I've been asked to demonstrate making a rope bowl. Now I have different types of rope. This was grunt rope from Bunnings. It's 5mm. And this morning I've just made some coasters to use up the tail ends from the bowls that I've made.
Wow.
And these are gifts for some friends on Saturday. Yes, well, they did look a bit like that. Luckily I had 3, because Peggy said if I'd only had 2, they might have looked a bit suggestive. Then there are other kinds of rope. This is 7mm, and that's what I'm using here. It was a bit difficult to start off. What you have to watch for is joins in the rope. If you're going to cover it with fabric, you can get rid of that. But if you're not, you need to miss that piece.
How do you miss that piece?
Well, I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But I would say it's better to cover it with fabric.
Oh, okay. Yep.
When I made these, I cut 1 1/4 inch strips straight fabric, and it was actually quite difficult to wind it around the rope because it's straight. So this time I've cut some, on these I used bias cuts, and it was much easier to wind around the rope. And that's just to use up the ends of what I made those with. These I bought in cheap shops. I think it was about $3.95, and it is working. So when you start off, you need to unwind the whole thing, otherwise it can twist, and you could put it on the floor. And I have found that it's actually better to use magic tape because it's not quite as noticeable as ordinary sticky tape. And if you don't do that, the whole thing's going to unravel. So you do need to do that and cut in the middle of it so that it doesn't come undone. And you can barely see it actually in the middle of it. What I have to do is learn how to tidy up the end. Another thing that I want to learn to do, and I haven't yet, is how to get the sides straighter, because these are all on a diagonal, and I'd really like to get some straight bowls, but I have to go to YouTube for that. Now to start off making the bowl, you start off with the flat bit, and these are just round ones. I haven't done the ones where you do it so that you get a more rectangular bowl. You need to have quite a wide zigzag. This machine is set at 4.5 stitch width and 2.5 stitch length, and you use a forget the name of the foot, but it has to have the slot in it, otherwise you're going to break your needle if you're using a 1/4 inch foot. And some machines have got a foot that have got this has got a split, some have got a line, and you can use that to line up so that your stitching is on both, because it looks a bit funny if you've got a hole in the bowl.
Is that a James needle?
Yes, it is. You use a heavier needle, and I'm only using Resent thread. Depending how big you want the base to be, how big you make the flat bit. Now most of these were about 3 inches across, so you can measure. This one's going to be slightly bigger, 3.5. Now I need to go up the sides, so what I have to do is hold this up against the machine so that it starts to curve. And this is where you really need this out of the way. You really have to concentrate because you've got to keep it up against the machine. and you've got to keep it moving. And you also need to keep the rope against the last row, otherwise you will end up with a hole. Now I'm definitely not an expert at this, I'm still learning. But there's plenty of ideas on Pinterest and there are plenty of YouTube lessons. Right, can you see now that it's starting to curl up? Alright, well you could decide to put, I actually went a little bit further before I started putting some fabric on it. And I've decided that it's actually better to have a smooth edge if you can. And you have to wind it around. You can use binding clip to hold it at this end. But I found when I was doing this the other day, I very quickly got to the binding clip and I wanted to be careful not to hit it with my needle. The start is quite tricky. You don't really need to worry too much about that because the next row will actually hold it in place. If you're using a contrasting thread, this is where it's quite important that you line up the slot in your foot with the joins between the two, otherwise your stitches are going to look pretty uneven. So you can only do a little bit or it starts to unravel. And the reason I used the bias cut was that I was hoping that it wasn't going to fray as much as a straight cut. Bias edges are not supposed to fray as much because it can look a little bit tatty. Okay, so just follow around until I've finished that, and you can see that it ends up in different places depending on the length of your fabric. I used two different ones here. That was a piece of batik. I thought that might not fray, but it did. And that's a piece of ombre, which had dark at the edges and light in the middle. These were batiks. Once you've sewn it, you can't really see too much about fraying, but you need some nice sharp pointed scissors to get any bits off. So, good luck.
Thank you.